Ingo, you've got a couple of questions too. Please go ahead.
Yeah. Hello, Tom. I have read that some people who have experienced an emotional stressful situation can develop physical symptoms like chronic muscle tension. Then maybe a year later, this person gets a massage where this muscle tension gets released, and this person then also get an emotional reaction, and these old emotions get expressed, which causes the tension in the body. Have you heard about it? Do you know how this works? Can emotions somehow stored in the virtual body?
Yes, they're stored in the sense that if you have stress, just say stress, let that be a kind of a catch-all. If you have stress, that stress will manifest as tight muscles in the body, no matter what the stress is. Could be emotional stress or some other sort of stress. And, this is one of the ways that we make ourselves ill. So all the stress we have and the negative feelings we have tend to affect our body. But when that gets released, it doesn't necessarily may bring that old emotion back up to the surface. Okay. When that gets released, if there's a one-to-one correlation, which often there's not, because you may have 100 different sources of stress, and they all put tension, say, in the muscles back of your neck and in your shoulders, and down your back. So you have all of these real tight muscles from, the shoulders down. But that's not just because of one thing. That's because of life. Hundreds of things have been storing stress back there. So as those get worked out, you're not going to have a single, I'm reliving this moment. It's not going to be like that. It's just going to be letting go of stress, and you should feel more relaxed and lighter without it. If you did have some particular thing that was stored in just some particular part rather than many things stored there, then it's possible that as you release that, your mind might come back to that issue. But in releasing, it should also be releasing that issue. In other words, if there was one thing, and that was a knot in your lower back or something, and it was because of this, with one individual, somebody you always conflict with, then maybe when you get that massage, you may have that person may come to your mind. You may think of that person, but it shouldn't be to regain the stress. It's not like, there's a conservation of misery here to where you can store it in your body, and then when it comes out of your body, it's back in your mind, and then you can store it back in your body, and you're kind of stuck in this cycle of can't get rid of it. It shouldn't be like that at all. When that massage frees it up, you ought to be done with it. Now you can go have another fight with that person and store some more back in there, but as you let go of it, at least it's letting go of that physical manifestation of it. And that's good. That's helpful to do that. So it's the emotional reaction that you may get to releasing a physical stress ought to be a helpful one, not one that just reinitiates the original feeling. So no, I wouldn't agree with it that it works that way. I suspect it could possibly work that way in some people's cases because they're so, obsessed with a particular issue. And, that obsession may connect those two like that. But in general, I don't think that's how it works. I think that would be only some individuals, not in general. In general, when you work out those knots, that helps you let go of the manifestation of that problem. Now you may put some, if the problem's still there, you may put that stress back in your body again. But if that problem's not there, you may not. You just may be over it. So I don't think there's this conservation of misery sort of thing. You either get the stress in your mind and you're dealing with it, or you get it in your body, and when you get rid of one, you get the other one. It's not passing things off. The stress in your mind isn't alleviated because of you passing it to your body. You still have it in your mind. All you're doing is making the body, it's not like you're taking it from your mind and storing it in your body. It's still there in your mind. Your body is just, I often say the mind leads, the body follows. Your body will adapt itself to your consciousness. So if in your consciousness you have a lot of stress, your body will start to show signs of that stress in the physical system. It tends, the avatar tends to take on the attitudes of the mind. It just takes them on in a different way. It may be a knot in your neck or something, but that's because you've got a knot in your consciousness someplace where you're dealing with something you're not dealing with very well. So that knot in your consciousness is mirrored into your avatar as a knot in the neck. It's that sort of thing. So you get rid of the knot in the neck, but you don't get rid of the knot in the consciousness, then you'll probably just put it back. But if you get rid of the knot in the consciousness, then the knot in the neck will just disappear. So it could work either way. One's just a manifestation. The one in the avatar is a manifestation of what's in your consciousness. So the only way to get rid of that is really to get rid of the problem in your consciousness. Then you won't have that knot in your neck.
That's funny. I actually have something on my neck. It's funny that you talk about it.
It just seemed the right thing to say.
Yes. Okay. I have a second question. It's about daydreams. And I was wondering, what is the difference between daydreaming and an OBE? Sometimes I have daydreams where I need a few seconds to orient myself when I come back, so to speak, and don't know how much time has passed or if I missed getting out of the bus. And I was wondering if these daydreaming states can be helpful to have an OBE.
Yes, there's a very strong connection between daydreaming and OBE. The biggest difference is the attitude you bring to it. That's the biggest difference. It's sort of like the difference between OBE and lucid dreams. The biggest difference is the attitude you bring to it. What's the difference between OBE and remote viewing? You can go OBE and then go someplace and view it and see what it is, and then you bring information back. Well, is that remote viewing? Is that OBE? Well, it just depends on the attitude and the process you go through. All these things are very similar. Okay, what you're doing in a daydream is the same things that you would do, say, to have an OBE. In a daydream, you let go of all your sense perception data. You stop processing it. Yes, you still know that you're there, you're sitting in a chair, you still can hear the traffic in the street, but you stop processing it. You no longer, you let your awareness drift away from it. Maybe another way to say it. So when you do that, that defines basically this point consciousness, where you are no longer attached to your sense data, no longer processing sense data. And then you're taking your mind and you're going off into some other adventure, some other interaction. Now, one of the differences is that if you are daydreaming, but you never get out of your intellect, if your intellect is in charge and you're having a daydream and you are orchestrating every piece of it, okay, it's all coming out of your intellect, then that's not at all like an OB. But if you have this daydream and it kind of takes on a life of its own, things happen, and not necessarily things you expected to happen. Situations develop and things happen, and it goes from this to that, and it has a life of its own. Well, that means there's a data stream coming to you that's defining that. Now, you may have started out by your imagination creating that data stream, and maybe now your imagination is creating half of the data stream, but not necessarily all of it, because things are coming into it that aren't things that you necessarily would have made up. See what I mean? If it's a daydream that takes on its own characteristics, its own life, where things happen that surprise you when they happen. Somebody says something or does something, or you get this result, and that's kind of, oh, okay, now I'm going to have to do something else. Well, that's very similar to an OBE. An OBE is basically where you let go of your sense data, stop operating on it, and start getting a data stream from the larger consciousness system. It's a single player game, if you like it. Here, in this physical reality, it's a multiplayer game. Us and a lot of other people interacting with each other. When you do an OBE, you just let go of this data stream, that's the multiplayer game, and start getting a data stream that's a single player game. Some adventure, things you do, things happen, but things that happen aren't things that you planned or necessarily would have come up with. It's just stuff that happens. So that lets you know that it's coming from outside of you. If it's all just under the control of your intellect, then it's not coming from outside of you. If all of the things are just kind of obvious things that you might have thought of or might have done or might have questioned or so on, it is just you going through various possibilities in your own mind about the way something might play out, then that's not so much like an OBE. But if you're out actually having an interaction, an adventure, you interact with other people or things, and those interactions seem to be powered on their own. It's not you doing it, then it's very much the same as an OBE. So it can be, just depends on the nature of the daydream. And yes, it's a good technique to get into an OBE. A good technique is to start with a daydream. Start with your imagination. And when your imagination gets to a point where there's uncertainty in what might happen next, that's a jumping off point into the OBE. See? Now what I mean by that, let's say in your imagination you are walking through an old building, and a magic old building at that. You can imagine all sorts of things. Magic works fine in your imagination. And now you get to this door, and that door is a portal into some other reality in your imagination. So now you walk up to that door and you open it and jump through. Okay, now what happens next? You see, if you haven't made up the story, what happens next is I fly and do this and do that. If you really haven't made up anything of what happens next, when you jump through that portal, you allow the system to start feeding you data. You see, now that's the trick to switch you from the data stream in your imagination to a data stream from the LCS. Suddenly, you're getting this data, and it could be partly you, partly the LCS at first, and then fully the LCS once you get into whatever that adventure is on the other side of the portal. So portals and things, yes, they're imaginary things, but what they do is they help us lead ourselves to the point where we're open to a different data stream. You see, it just opens us to the possibility of a different data stream, and then we grab that data stream, and whatever happens is what happens after that. And that's really that is an OBE, because you're now out having experience someplace else and it's not here. That's what OBE means. It's you're no longer in the physical multiplayer game. You're in some other virtual reality. All realities are virtual realities. If you can have an experience in a reality, it's a virtual reality. All realities that are experiential are virtual realities. So it's just a matter of getting a different data stream. And one good way to do it is to just open yourself to a possibility of something unique, something that you don't have any story built for, and then let that story come as it comes. And that gives the LCS a chance to feed you data. Now, why would the LCS decide to feed you a single-player game? Almost always, these OBEs are something that you can learn from. They're lessons. You make choices in them. You're not just a voyeur. Very seldom is your OBE just looking at things. Mostly it provides you with choices. You have to decide what to do. And those choices are just as valid in your learning and in your growing as any choice in any reality. So the system now takes an advantage of giving you a data stream that helps you learn something significant, helps you learn something maybe about reality or about out-of-body experiences or about something else. So yes, those two are very much connected. It was a very good question. And it's one that I try, and when I talk to people about out-of-body, I tell them, don't be afraid to use your imagination. It's a good tool. But many people say, oh, imagination. But if I'm using my imagination, then it's not really an out-of-body. It's just me making it all up. Well, there is no way for you to really know the difference. So don't try to judge it. Just experience it. Just go with the experience. Now, after you've experienced it dozens of times, now you can start to judge, get your intellect comes back into it and says, was there anything that happened that I learned something from? Was there any value in it? Was there anything there that is significant to me and my growth and my understanding? And if the answer is yes, well, then keep doing it. It's valuable to you. If the answer is no, well, let it go. Try something else. Instead of a door, make the portal, a little round, circle of light or something, and try it a different time. Go, do something else. So that's the way you judge it. If you judge it immediately upon having it, if the first instant, you open the door and now you are, standing on a grassy field someplace and you don't know where it is. If the first thought of yours is, what is this? Am I just making this up, or is this an out-of-body? Well, that's your intellect jumping in, trying to judge when it doesn't have enough information. It can't judge. That's the intellect guessing, and it'll just take you right out of that situation, and you'll never get anywhere. You just have to go with it and go with it to the point that you can determine. So the intellect has 20 such journeys, and now it can ask the question, well, did I learn anything from that? Was it useful? Is it valuable? And if the answer is yes, keep doing it. If the answer is no, then leave it alone. So it's that. The question isn't, is it real? People get wound up around the question, is it real? That's a very bad question. Information is real. There's nothing more real than information. Getting an information, interpreting it, that's what our reality is. So the fact that that information comes from your own consciousness, it's still real. You're getting information. It's just, what is the source is more of the question. What is the source? Not is it real? Okay, well, eventually you will be able to tell whether or not the source is likely to be you. You will never know 100%. You can never know with no uncertainty. But you'll have a lot of clues. You'll get a lot of things that'll happen to you that are just not inside you to come up with them, and you'll be aware of that. You'll maybe have some thing where you do a remote viewing, or you talk to somebody who who's dead or something, and they tell you things that you can come back here and check, things that you didn't know, things that there were no way for you to know, and you can come back here and check them, and yeah, there they are. Well, then that gives you a little bit of documentation that you have done something, gotten information that wasn't in your head to begin with. And if you can get that kind of verification, 100 times, then you start getting confidence that what you're doing is really connected to someplace else. And that's what I mean with experience. You'll have these evidential moments. Those evidential moments will eventually help you build confidence. And again, the question isn't, is it real? The question is it useful? But with experience, you'll be able to tell to a large degree, again, not with total certainty, but to a large degree, where it's coming from. Is it coming? There's only three possibilities: coming from yourself, it's coming from the LCS or it's coming from some other IUOC. And based on the nature of the information you get, it's not that hard to determine which of those is most likely. See, out of body is not nearly as hard as you thought. You don't have to climb up a rope or do anything, cool about getting out of your body, because you were never in your body in the first place. It's all about your awareness, your consciousness. And it's just a matter of shifting data streams, not a matter of getting some, etheric, subtle, protoplasmic body to ooze out of the top of your head and go somewhere. All that is just nonsense. It's just about attaching your awareness to a different data stream. And starting with a daydream is a good way of starting as any. Actually, it's a very good way of starting. Does that help?
Yes, that helps. Thank you. Asking me that question because I was sitting in a train, watching out of the window, and then the daydreaming starts, and after it ends, I need really to think how much time has happened. I thought it may be 5 minutes or 10 minutes, but it only were a few seconds. And then I'm asking myself, was that something like an OBE? And that's why I'm asking that question.
Yeah, it's very much like an OBE.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ingo. I'm going to go on to a couple of questions that we didn't get to ask at the last couple of Fireside chats. Question from Voyager on high suicide rate of older people in Korea. I read that the suicide rate has become quite high in South Korea for older people, simply because they don't have sufficient income to continue paying their bills. Many are in poor health and do not have relatives they can move in with. Obviously, the country needs to develop a better social safety net. But what would you say to these folks who are faced with a difficult choice between either living on the streets or killing themselves? They do not have nearly enough shelters for all the homeless people, perhaps like other places in the world. When is it time to trade in the old junker for a shiny new model? If you don't have the funds to keep a roof over your head, is there any value in old, sick people battling to survive in the streets, considering all the suffering that entails?
Well, that question, and the answer to that question depends on the individual. There may be some older people who are homeless, but who are at the same time learning a great deal. They're making relationships, they're finding community within that homelessness, they are getting by somehow, they're persevering, and if that's a growing situation to them, if it's something that they are learning, even if it's difficult, it may be very difficult, but if they're learning, then sure, they should keep chugging along. Maybe they're able to help others. Maybe they are able to, help some of the new people that come into that situation, figure out, where do you go, to get fed? Where do you go to find housing? What lines do you stand in? What services do you apply for? So they may find a niche there that makes them useful and helpful and gives them satisfaction. If that's the case, or maybe they're just hanging out with each other. They just have friends there that they enjoy being with. So if that's the case, then yes, they should continue on. If, on the other hand, they don't have any of that, they're just hopeless, they don't have anything going on for them, and maybe that's because they've just kind of sunk into the depths of self-pity. Oh, woe is me. And they can't see anything other than negativity in any direction. There's nothing going for them. Everything's negative. Nothing is positive. And in that case, then ending it may not be a bad decision. That may be if they're dead-ended. Now, if they're just dead-ended temporarily until they get their feet back under them, or they find some situation, or they make some friends, or whatever, then the suicide would be a really bad idea. You see, a lot of that is, people who are depressed people who feel really dead-ended, like there's no way to go, there's no way to climb. They're just stuck at the bottom where they are. Some of that isn't because they're really stuck at the bottom. Some of it's just culture shock. They've never been there before. They've never been poor before. They've never been on the street before. And a lot of it is culture shock, and it's not that they have no choices, is that they can't see the choices that they have. In that case, it would be better if they could find some of those choices that they have and continue on with their growth. But if they can't find any of those and they're not making any progress toward finding any of those, then if they feel that they're stuck, then that would be an option to exit so they could get on with something more productive. Now, part of this in Korea is because of the changing in their culture. We have, you often hear me say that Western culture is not Western anymore. It's taking over the world. It's everywhere, a materialist culture. In the Korean culture of old, and this doesn't go back that, you don't have to go that far back to be there, maybe, a generation or two, it was the culture specified who took care of the older people. If you were the eldest son in a family, then the eldest son had the responsibility of taking care of the parents. That was just his job because he was the eldest son, and that was part of that culture. So the parents, if they had any sons at least, the eldest one was obligated to take care of them. And that was a part of the culture. There's a lot of Asian cultures are like that. Who takes care of the parents and so on are not kind of left up to the family. That's a part of the cultural things you do and things you don't do. It's responsibilities of you to do that. And I think that has broken down to some degree. It's not like that anymore. With the internet, the cultures, we're coming up to world culture sort of thing. And our own personal cultures don't mesh with what we see on the internet or what we want to do or with our egos, then it's easy to kind of cut them loose and say, well, Mom and Dad, you're on your own. I know I'm the oldest son, but hey, I just got a job offer in another part of the world, and see you around. Good luck. So we have that going on that didn't happen 2 or 3 generations ago. Job offer or not, dutiful son would come and fulfill his obligation to parents. And not so much anymore. So cultures have been kind of breaking down and homogenizing into something that is a little hard in transition. So I suspect the Korean government, as they see this problem developing, will start building more shelters, more places for these people to go, more things for them to do, activities for them to take place in, jobs that they can do, things where they can have their experience and their knowledge can be part of a process rather than the culture, dumps them out at a particular age because that's when they're supposed to retire. There may be other things they can do. They may teach in elementary schools. There's a lot of things that they might do. That just has to be organized. It's not a part of their culture now, but maybe it could be after this transition has had some time to sort itself out. So I'd say this is temporary. It's just a cultural upheaval as culture changes and people try to adapt to it. There's no point in going on just to go on if you're not learning anything. The sad part is you may have things that you could learn, but you're not aware of it. So you don't learn. You just focus on the negative. And that's sad when people do that because there may be lots of things they could do that they don't do because they just don't know that choice is there. And then for that person to commit suicide because they're not aware of the choices that they have, that's pretty sad. And hopefully you would have some social workers and other people trying to work with them and help them see those kinds of choices. But if you are at a dead end or if you are ill and in pain, and your choice is to stay completely drugged up, and that's the only way you can survive, but that leaves you completely blotto, so you can be a live vegetable or you can die. Then, of course, dying is probably the better idea. Move on. It's not, there's no punishment for committing suicide. The only punishment is whether or not you leave opportunities that you could have had unexplored. Opportunities for learning, that you leave them unexplored.
Another question from the MBT forum is from Fun IUOC on the representation of our quality of consciousness. I am curious as to how our quality of consciousness is represented data-wise in our IUOC. I understand that we generally do not retain intellectual knowledge between experience packets. So that would seem to rule out remembering specific algorithms for making decisions. How then is the quality of our consciousness represented so there is a continuity and growth between lifetimes without us recalling specific memories and algorithms? It's an interesting question.
Well, I think in a way we're digging a little deep into the metaphors beyond where the metaphors are actually intended to work when we ask a question like that. That is, IUOCs, individual units of consciousness, for people that aren't familiar with that acronym, larger consciousness system, free will awareness units, all of these things are metaphors trying to describe a function of consciousness. The MBT model, okay, is a model. It's not, don't look at it as fact. That's not, I'm not saying this very well. You have to look at a model as a model. It's a structure that tries to explain experience. And that's what it is. And in order to be able to talk about the various functions of consciousness, I have come up with this model that has to do with the larger conscious system and individuated units of consciousness and so on. And those metaphors, stand for functions, for kind of basic functions within the consciousness. Now, to get down to the very details of what's inside that IUOC, what does the data structure look like in there, and what's it programmed in, and how's it programmed, and, where does the free will come from in this program structure? And, we can get to that, and there's answers for that, but they're all just general kind of answers. It's digging deeper into the metaphor than what the metaphor really is there for. So I would say that just leave it at the point where the IUOC has memory. It also has quality. It also has, it's like it's got its intellectual part and it's got its being level part. Just like when we express that with our avatar. Okay, we have our intellectual part that's all about the analysis. It's all about the memory and taking those memories and coming to conclusions based on them. That's the judging, assessing, analyzing part of the intellect. And then there is the part that just is. That's at the being level. It's just the way you are. It doesn't analyze, it doesn't judge, it just is what it is. That's at the being level. Okay, now we have those, and let's say consciousness just has that too. That's our consciousness when we're here. Well, that's the way the IUOC is made. Trying to break that down into coding and more specifics than that is probably not helpful. So if consciousness has those two components, it has the intuitive component and it has the intellectual component. And that's the nature of consciousness. Well, you're going to take that being level component, which represents just who you are at the core. That's the being level. That's what you're going to keep. That's what goes on into the next free will awareness unit. That's what goes on into the next avatar. You take along that being level information And what you leave behind is that intellectual information, which includes all the specific memory. Okay? So I just break it down like that and not try to get to any more detail than that. I think then we'd be pushing the metaphors beyond the point where the metaphors really go. So all the rest of that is just whatever the larger conscious, however the larger conscious system models those things. But we as consciousness also have two parts. One's intellectual. Intellectual has to do with what's in your aware mind. Okay, that's what you remember. And all the things you don't remember and all the feelings and all the rest of that stuff lives at the being level. It's just who and what you are. That represents the core of you. Okay, so that core of you is what gets passed on to the free will awareness unit into the next lifetime, and that intellectual part is what is not passed on. So I just make it like that and not try to dig any deeper than that.
Thank you, Tom. The next question from MBT Forum user Gray comes in April. I have a reoccurring experience where a formless thing is calling out to me with a sound that brings tears to my eyes just to recall it. The more I try to overcome it, the more chaos and horrors occur around me. As this is a reoccurring event, I have become familiar with the process. I cannot speak of the horrors I'm shown, but each time I would rather choose to face them than answer the call. It's unbearable. If I wake up, I get dragged back against my will. Time slows and I can't escape. The worst of it happened 2 nights ago. I came back and I had completely missed work. Here's my question. In your experience and understanding of reality, what do you think is happening? Can fear tests really become this extreme? If so, how do I face something that torments my very being so deeply and yet is formless?
Yeah, I'm not really sure that I have, from his description, and I really understand his experience. It seems like he has a dream or an experience, and it is a negative experience, it sounds like. But then he says,
this formless thing is calling out to me with a sound that brings tears to my eyes.
Okay, now a formless thing calls out. Now how does that then get translated into horrible things that happen? What's the connection there?
The more he tries to overcome it, the more chaos and horrors occur around me.
Okay, now wait a minute.
He's become familiar with this process.
Okay, so he has a thing that calls to him, and he wants to withstand it or somehow not give in to this thing, and then he gets horrible.
Yeah, he would rather choose to face them rather than answer the call. So this thing is calling out, he's not answering. He would rather face this chaos that goes around him. And he seems to be dragged back into this against his will.
Yeah.
Can't escape.
It does sound a little forceful for a fear test. I would agree with that. But I would suggest that he try just, answering the call, as he calls it. Now, I don't know exactly what that means to him. He doesn't explain that very well, but see what happens. He said he'd rather experience all the horrible stuff than do that. Well, then do that and see what happens. Nothing's really going to hurt you. This is all going on in mental space. This is all information being sent to you that you are interpreting. You see, nothing's going to bite you and hurt you. The most dangerous thing that you've got is your own fear. That's the thing that can hurt you. It's not something outside of you. It's your own fear is what hurts you. So I would think that because there's so many unknowns, if I knew more, I could maybe give him more specific advice. But with that kind of general description, I would say perhaps he should just go to that thing that's calling to him. Answer the call. See what it's all about. And if it turns out badly, well, it doesn't sound like it could be much worse than the other stuff he's getting. That seems to be stuff that's really a problem too. So try it, and try it without fear. Just try it with the idea, I'm going to see what it is. I'm going to explore it. And the worst thing that can happen is I'll wake up here and, go on with my life. It's just data. It's just information. It's an experience. So,
okay,
that would be the suggestion. If it is a fear test, then that would be the solution. Not to do the other stuff, but to go see what that call is all about, and it may turn out to be nothing at all. It was just whether or not he could get the courage to do it. Now, if it's something else, I can't tell that because I don't have enough of his description and feeling and so on, and I understand. It's hard to write like 10 pages to, send in a question. But in any case, so that would be my first guess, would be just go do it. See what happens. It's not going to hurt you. The only thing that can hurt you is your own fear. So go to it with courage. I'm just going to see what goes on here. I'm going to experience it. Worst thing that can happen is I'll wake up in my bed in a cold sweat, and I'll, get up and stay up for a little bit, or I'll write it all down. I'll describe it in my notes. It's, the imagined horrors are generally much, much worse than the actual facts that you run into in this case.
It seems whatever this sound is more frightful to him than going through this whole process.
Right. And that's why I say that it's probably the choice to go with the sound, because how frightful can sound be? I think what's happening is the system is impressing upon him this sense of terror at the sound and seeing how he deals with that.
Right. Unless it's an issue he's trying to avoid that is familiar to him, but we cannot ascertain that.
No. But I would also tell him, if you can't get the courage to face it, to go toward that sound, then maybe it's best not to do it, because if you go with a lot of terror in your heart, then you're liable just to scare yourself more. So I'd say screw up your courage to where you can face it, and then do it. And if you can't get that courage, if you can't find that courage, then just leave it alone. If you can't leave it alone because it keeps nagging at you, it keeps coming back and nagging at you, then I don't know what you're going to do at that point. It seems like you're caught between a rock and a hard place. You can't sleep, and you can't stay awake. So at that point, I guess you'd have to try something beyond what I know about. You'd have to maybe take something that would help you sleep at a deeper level, so you wouldn't have that. I don't know. But at first, I think you ought to be able to get yourself in a mood and in a mindset that you're just going to find out nothing can hurt you. You'll wake back up in your bed and you'll be just fine. So get your courage and go do it and see what it is. If you can't do that, then I guess you have to deal with it some other way. That's the only direct way I know to deal with it. Other than that, I don't know what to do about it. If you refuse to if you refuse to open door A and you always go through door B, and door B is horrible, how bad could door A be? And maybe that's the thing you're supposed to explore. I would try that, but then I don't have a lot of fear around those things. If he does have a lot of fear around those things, I don't want him to come back hysterical or something, so that would not be good. So you have to figure it out on your own about how much courage you have, and whether or not you think this is going to be something that you can do without fear.
All right, Tom, thank you. The next question comes from Robert A.C. from the MBT Forum. On March 2018, I sat down on my bed and asked the LCS, "Who are you?" In English, not my first tongue, but it's the only language I love. Then laid down and slept. I didn't expect any answer. I dreamt that night of a perfect, dark, silent void where I saw black letters on white, small pieces of plastics, exactly like the departures and arrival boards in train stations. The colors were reversed, falling slowly, one after the other, from left to right in capital letters that read, "I am an entity." I woke up immediately and didn't remember anything else from that night. I was shocked because the word entity wasn't in my vocabulary back then. Later I asked other questions, but never had an answer.
Yes, well, things like that happen. You know, you ask a question, often you'll get an answer. And what you do with that answer will often determine whether you get more questions answered. If you just take that answer and go, wow, okay, now what? And don't really pursue it, then maybe nothing else will happen. But evidently that question was just asked at the right level. You know, it probably wasn't from his intellect. It probably was from the being level. He had probably dropped into that zone where he was mostly being level. And he asked that question, and when you're in the right place, then you get an answer. And the fact that he got it like that, the system gives you information in a way that you can best understand it. So I would say he should continue with that. Try to get back in that spot where he was when he asked that question. Get back in that same mindset. Not work it from his intellect, but get back at that intuitive level where he asked the first question and start asking more questions till he builds up a relationship with the system.
All right, thank you. Next question comes from also Robert A.C. Questions for Tom on sugar, suffering, and the usefulness of illness. You said that illness can be useful and needed for us to evolve, and you said that sugar disturbs our consciousness and subsequently jeopardizes our evolution. If sugar has such a negative effect on consciousness, imagine how much physical suffering can be negative for it. It's like advocating drinking a soft drink constantly. Try to think when you have a headache. How can that be helpful for our evolution? I fail to see the benefit of that. I'm not sure where he's going there, but...
I didn't really hear a question yet.
Yeah. Also, you said that suffering brings benefits to the members of the family who are taking care of the sick person because they learn compassion, for example. Well, this is going into another question. So
okay.
We're trying to figure out what his question on sugar is. Negative effect on consciousness. Imagine how much physical suffering can be negative for it.
Well, let us talk a little bit about this in general, and maybe I'm not sure just what his question is, but okay. His next question goes into suffering. And yes, illness can be a learning experience. Okay, illness forces you to make choices that you wouldn't have to make otherwise. Learning is about making choices, and illness often puts you into it certainly puts you into a different set of choices. Let's say you're ill, and because you're ill, you have to be pushed around in a wheelchair. That puts you in a completely different set of choices than when you were able to walk and do things for yourself. Different attitudes. Does it make you angry that you're in the wheelchair? Do you resent the fact that, why me in this wheelchair? That sort of thing. Well, those would all be things that were de-evolving, not evolving. Can you accept? Can you learn from the changes in your dependency? When you're ill, often you're a lot more dependent on other people to help you. You're dependent on doctors and nurses, but also on family and relatives to help you get by when you're ill. Does that help you see the value in these people? There's a lot of things you can get just because it gives you a different set of choices. Bumps you out of the rut you were in before you were ill, where you had the same, maybe, the same sets of choices kept coming up over and over again, and gives you now a new set. new questions give you new opportunity. New choices give you new opportunity for growth. So also, you can learn from it because many illnesses are a result of attitudes. And if you have a very negative attitude, then you're liable to have physical ailments that go along with that. Physical ailments that are there because of your negative attitude. Again, the mind follows the body. The mind leads, the body follows. So that's the connection. Now, not everybody learns things from illness. Some people get ill and they just get, cranky and whatever, and they don't learn much from it. It's just opportunity. And if you are somebody that has to take care of an ill person, you may learn something from it. You may learn about giving. You may learn about, service, or you may not. You may just learn about resentment and about, why now you're spending your time taking care of this person instead of out partying, and you resent it. So they're just opportunities, choices. You can learn from things or not learn from things, but at least when you get a new set of choices, you have opportunity to learn something new. If you just keep going and making the same choices over and over again in a life that's become very repetitious, then your learning is slow. So something new plops into your life, and that gives you new choices. And when it does, there's opportunities for growth. So it's not like everybody should go get ill because there's such wonderful opportunities, to grow from being sick. It's not like that at all. It's that if you are sick, you should always look at why. Where did this illness come from? Why do I have this? And if you find it's because of your past choices, your lifestyle choices, the choices of what you eat, the choices of how negative or positive you are, then you can maybe change those choices, you see. So it's just getting ill or getting a headache isn't like that's, a quick road to growing up. It's just another set of choices, new choices. That's kind of the connection there. And as you take care of people that have illnesses, that's a new set of choices. Now you have responsibility you didn't have before. It's like having a baby. When a couple has a baby, they get a whole new set of choices to deal with. Not at all like the choices they used to have. It's just a totally different world they live in as far as the choices that they have to make. So whenever your life changes, particularly in a substantial way, you end up with new opportunities for growing up, new perspectives, new attitudes. So illness can be a learning experience, but it doesn't mean it has to be a learning experience. You can get ill or you can have a child and remain just as self-centered and negative as you always were. It's unfortunate, but nothing makes you grow up. You have to grab that opportunity and make the right choices. So did I answer both questions?
Well, I think you answered most of it. And Robert, if we haven't answered your question, if I haven't done justice to reading it, please resubmit it, reformulate it, resubmit it, and we'll give it another go. Robert does also have another question. Why shouldn't we fear poverty and illness and death when the LCS itself wants to evolve because it fears its own de-evolution and death?
Well, I would not say it fears its de-evolution and death. I think that would be a wrong statement. Now, it's just this thing that people get confused with fear and being stupid. It's like, well, jump off this cliff, and if you don't jump, if you're fearless, why don't you jump off the cliff? And you can say, well, just because I'm fearless, I'm not stupid. I don't want to jump off the cliff because that's a dumb thing to do. Well, the larger conscious system is like that too. Don't confuse the idea that being fearless makes you stupid, or compare the two. It's not that the larger conscious system fears its dissolution and death. It's that it's smart enough and intelligent enough and knowledgeable enough to not want to go there, so it works on systems that evolve rather than systems that de-evolve. It's just an intelligent choice, just like not jumping off the cliff is an intelligent choice. Because you make an intelligent choice not to run through the woods when the grizzly bears are mating, that doesn't mean that you're afraid of grizzly bears. It means that you have a brain and you realize that there's no sense putting yourself at risk when risk isn't required. So I think that's the thing. I would not jump to the conclusion that the system has fear of dissolution. I would say that it's aware of that as a possibility, it's intelligent, and it makes good choices. That's different than being fearful.